Happy Saturday and welcome to the deal. I'm your host, Ed Clark. It is Saturday, April 10th, 2021. And we're back again to talk to you about all the things that are going on in the world. And, uh, one thing that happened this week that's really important. I mentioned it last week. I'm a year older, so I'm still accepting gifts if you're inclined to send a gift. But in addition to that, when you grow older, you're supposed to grow wiser. And I'm still struggling with that part, but we'll see what happens. In the meantime, let's go ahead and get our regular in here, Val Atkinson. Val, welcome to the deal.
Thank you, Ed. I'm glad to be here.
Well, I'm glad to be here too, Val. I want to start this week with something that I know is near and dear to your heart. I play golf very badly over the years. I have really nice clubs that I look at occasionally that I haven't used in earnest in years, and that I should play more because I think golf is a great game, and I think you would say that too. But this week the Masters started, and it's not a Tiger Woods story. This is about Lee Elder, and but before we get to that, let's go to the clip of Lee Elder, and then we'll come back on the other side. And I want you to tell the folks who Lee Elder is and why this is important.
Welcome to our friends at Payne College, and of course, the many family and friends of our guest honorary starter, Mr. Lee Elder. Lee Elder is the first black man to compete in the Masters, and in doing so, blazed a trail that will inspire the game of golf and future generations of players. We are delighted today to have with us a number of black golf professionals who are proud members of the PGA of America. They undoubtedly were inspired by Lee Elder and his message that the game of golf belongs to everyone. Today, Lee Elder will inspire us and make history once more, not with the drive, but with his presence, strength, and character. Lee, it is my privilege to say, you have the honors.
Okay, Val. So that was on the opening of the Masters. That was the president of Augusta National Country Club. And on the first day of big golf tournaments, they have a start, and they usually have a guest of honor. And this year, the guest of honor was Lee Elder. Tell us who Lee Elder is. You heard that he was the first black golfer to play in the Masters, but you have more about Lee Elder than that we need to know.
Well, Lee Elder, I met Lee Elder personally when I was living in Washington, and Lee used to play a lot of his golf in the DC area at a place called Oxen Run, which is populated now by the National Harbor over in that area, and everybody knows where that is. But it was a nice little quaint black golf course, and every little small town had him, and he played well. As a matter of fact, golfers like Jim Thorpe, who's from right here in North Carolina, was a understudy of Lee Elder. And I recall one time the guy I used to work with, Ray Chambers, who was one of the first head pros on the East Coast, invited Al Green and Lee Elder over. They needed a place to change clothes, so they used my apartment to do that. And that's when I met Lee. I was not playing golf at that time, but later on we go on and find out who he was. But Lee Elder, the Masters, to get to your question, Ed, the Masters has a rule regarding participation. The only people that play in the who are given an invitation to play in the Masters are golfers who have won a PGA Tour event. You have to win a regular PGA Professional Golf Association Tour event. And in many cases, African Americans weren't even invited to play, first of all. And then you got to beat all of these guys who've been playing golf since they were 4 and 5 years old. So Lee Elder won the Milwaukee Open, and he was had pictures taken of him jumping around, happy. And it was not a highly funded tournament, and some people not being aware of the rules of golf were wondering why he was so elated and happy at this minor tournament. Well, it qualified him to play in the Masters, and he became the first African American to ever play in the Masters. And he went on to win other tournaments. After that, he didn't make the cut, but just being there was a big thing. He led the way to others coming, even before Tiger Woods. You had people like Calvin Pete and Jim Dent and Jim Thorpe and a whole host of other Black golfers who played in the Masters and didn't do well until Tiger Woods came along. But Lee Elder was the first. So he's been recognized now as one of the 3 starters. That's one of the traditions of the Masters. When the tournament is given its go and said now the official starters will start the Masters, they have these 3 guys to come out and tee it up and hit a ceremonial ball down the first tee, and the tournament is officially open. For a long time, it was Jack Nicklaus, Arnold Palmer, and Gary Player. Well, of course, Arnold Palmer passed recently, so they needed to replace him. And they chose Lee Elder as the person that will be the 3rd starter for the Masters Golf Tournament, which is one heck of an honor. And that's why Lee Elder he's so humble in accepting this at this time.
It's really significant, Val. And there is a really good documentary that's been airing on UNC TV. And I'll try to post that link in there, but it's about Calvin Pete, Jim Thorpe, all the people you mentioned, Jim Dent. And there used to be a tournament out in Asheville that was like the biggest tournament for Black golfers for years. And now
the name of the show is Muni.
Yeah, Muni. That's it. Yeah, and it's a really good documentary because it gives you a sense of, Black folks have been playing golf since the beginning, and good golfers too. And there would have been many more Lee Elders way before Tiger Woods had the opportunity. So I wanted to start off the day with that, Val, because I think it's a good story, because we're going to devolve during this program and talk about some really bad stuff. But I wanted to start off with Lee Elder because I thought that was a good story. There's another sports story, though, but before we get to that, I want to remind you, you're watching The Deal. I'm Ed Clark. That's Val Atkinson. We come here on Saturday and chop it up and talk about all kinds of stuff. But the next story I want to talk about, Val, is about Chapel Hill. I know you get the willies whenever I talk about Chapel Hill, but I love Chapel Hill because I lived there, went to school there, and I love Carolina basketball. And Carolina basketball did something really big. They hired an African-American coach. The first African-American coach that they ever hired was the track coach, Hubert. Can't remember Hubert's last name, but he was from Sampson County, really good long jumper, and he was dumb enough to let me on the team at Chapel Hill, and because he knew I was from Bun Level, I think. But anyway, Hubert Davis is a Tar Heel alum. He's worked under Coach Williams. Obviously, he played for Dean. What is the significance of Hubert Davis becoming the head basketball coach at Carolina?
Very significant, because there are good teams, there are great teams, and then there are the blue bloods. Carolina is a part of the blue bloods, and you can talk about 4 teams to be exact. That's Kansas, Carolina, Duke, and Kentucky. Those 4 teams, they are stellar in the world of collegiate basketball, and nobody can refute that. So for one of those teams to have an African-American coach is saying big things. And I take my hat off to Carolina. As everybody knows, I'm a Duke fan, but I take my hat off to Carolina for being number one again. They were number one with Charlie Scott, being not only the first African-American to play basketball with University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, but one of the first African-Americans to play basketball in the South with a large university. So I take my hat off to Carolina again for breaking that color line. I always thought that Hubert Davis was one of the people at the top of the list. He was on the short list before the decision was made as to who would be the coach. Everybody thought he would be. I don't know who could have been a better choice. I think he's going to do a great job. He's committed. He's a part of the Carolina family, and I wish him well.
Well, Val, one of the things that ended up being a quasi controversy at his press conference, he said this one line that a lot of people picked out. He said he was proud that his wife was white, and didn't put it in any context. Can you let's look at the video of what he actually said, and then we'll come back and talk about it.
Coach Davis, if you would speak to your feelings of being the first Black head coach at UNC men's basketball, and then have you had an opportunity to speak to Charlie Scott, the first Black scholarship basketball player at UNC?
I have not, and I just, before I came down here, I had a note on my desk saying that he called, and I'm so looking forward to giving him a call and having a conversation with him. It is significant, Steve. It's significant that I'm African-American and I'm the head coach here. It's significant. I know that in terms of Division I head coaches all around the country, only 26% of the head coaches for Division I men's basketball are compromised by minorities, specifically African-Americans. I know that it is significant that I'm the fourth African-American head coach in any sport in the history of the University of North Carolina. I'm very proud to be African-American, but I'm also very proud that my wife is white, and I'm very proud that my three beautiful, unbelievable kids are a combination of both of us.
So, Val, that's in the fuller context, right? He says that he's proud to be an African-American. He acknowledges Charlie Scott, the same person that you just acknowledged, right? He says that he is absolutely knows for certain it's a big deal because he's an African-American and he's at Carolina and he's the coach, right? So he goes on to say his wife is white. Now, the choice of word, try to speak extemporaneously in front of a whole bunch of reporters and have it come out exactly right every time. But he goes on to say that he's proud of his children and the children he's created with his wife, and he believes that's important. But in the fuller context, he's just as proud of being the first African-American coach. So it's this controversy, a faux controversy, Val, about him saying that he was proud his wife is white.
Well, I think you hit it on the head, the nail on the head when you talk about context. Because what he was really doing, what he was really saying there was that although my pride is great for being an African-American, for being the first African-American coach and following in the footsteps of Charlie Scott, and I'm proud to be an African-American, but I'm also proud of my wife who happens to be white. So I'm not in this situation where I'm only proud of one thing and I hate everything else. I'm proud of my wife, which is white, and our children, which are a product of an interracial union. That's what he was saying. And people are blowing it up. I don't know who these people are, but it's no story there.
No.
I mean, this is a basketball thing, and it was acknowledged that Carolina took the leap and hired a Black coach, and let's go on from there.
Yeah.
And this guy was honest enough to say, I have a white wife, and and it's no big thing.
It's
I'm
no
as
big
proud
thing.
of her as I am of myself being black.
Yeah, my grandchildren are mixed race. I'm proud of them. So if anybody got something to say about it, we can talk a little bit later. One last sports thing before we go to the break. The NCAA basketball tournament ended up. Everybody had picked Gonzaga all year. Gonzaga seems to get kind of close all the time, never gets over. Baylor ran them out of the gym. Did you expect that to happen? They just played lights out. The game was over probably in the first 5 minutes.
I did not expect that to happen, but being an old basketball guy myself, I saw how it happened. To tell you one thing it reminded me of, Ed, the analogy is some of the boys from the parochial schools, from Catholic schools, they win the Catholic school side of the tournament, and now they got to come down to the Y and play for the total city championship. And they running across boys. A guy explained it to me well. A young white kid once told me, he says, Val, I started playing at the playground with these guys, and I was about to go up for a rebound, and I looked around, and a set of Nike shoes was going over my shoulder. He said he knew he was in trouble right then. So I said, well, it's a different type of game. I think that's what Gonzaga saw. Gonzaga had never played against a team that played in your shirt defense.
Mm-hmm.
You know, none of this, by the way, you can have your shot, sir, if you choose to do so. I won't. No, they don't play that. They're in your face, in your shirt. They think that all rebounds are theirs, defensive and offensive. And the killer is that they can shoot. Teams like Gonzaga depend upon the other team being off. Yeah. And they get the rebound and run the floor. These guys were hitting the trays. Gonzaga was not prepared for a team like Butler that night.
No, they ran into a buzzsaw. Well, this is a good time to take a break. So we started off with sports today. I told you we're going to get serious when we come back. When we come back from the break, we're going to talk about the Derek Chauvin trial for the murder of George Floyd. Got to talk about it. Don't want to, but we have to. So stay right there. We'll be right back after this message.
The medical examiner's primary role, again, as I mentioned, is the cause of death, the manner of death, and the how injury occurred.
So if we look at the cause of death, immediate, underlying, other contributing conditions, this would be the section that you fill out then?
Correct.
So if we see here under manner of death, it indicates homicide. Tell us, what does homicide mean to you as a medical examiner?
So as a medical examiner, we applied the term homicide when the actions of other people were involved in an individual's death. It's one of 5 manners of death that we can choose from, the other 4 being accident, suicide, natural, or undetermined.
And welcome back to The Deal. I'm your host, Ed Clark. It's Saturday, April 10th, 2021. That's Val Atkinson, I'm Ed Clark. We started out talking about sports today, which we don't normally do, but I thought it was important to talk about Lee Elder. And of course, Val would have a Lee Elder story. Lee Elder was one of the starters for the Masters this year. Very, I watch golf. I know a lot of people don't, but I watch golf. Like I said, I play badly. Val plays much better. And I thought that was an important story. The other story about Hubert Davis, I wore my Carolina gear that day when Hubert was announced as the basketball coach, and I wore it proudly. I had on my Carolina mask even all day that day because I think it's important that African Americans get a shot at coaching at the highest level in college basketball. They're we're the most of the players. So you telling me there's not any of us that can be coaches? And I think Carolina proved again that being on the forefront here, putting Hubert Davis in at coach. But now we want to go to something somber, Val. Leading back in from the break, we saw the video of the prosecutor, Mr. Blackwell, who's from North Carolina, who is asking the medical examiner, what did George Floyd die from? And he said homicide. And a homicide means a person killed another person, homo sapien, right? Another homo sapien killed a homo sapien or was responsible for killing that other person. Talk to me about what you think so far about the witnesses that have been in the trial so far. That first week, there were a lot of people on the street that weren't experts, right? They just, were people that were on the street. And I think what they were trying to do is take away this notion that this crowd was dangerous. This week, they had on people who were experts in I mean, police chief, medical examiner, pulmonologist, all kind of, and everybody to a person says George Floyd died because he didn't have enough oxygen. However, you are smart enough to know, and you've sat on grand juries before, and you've done other things, and you know how this stuff works. It doesn't mean there's going to be a conviction, does it? So tell me though what your assessment is so far of, and especially these expert witnesses this week.
Well, I take a little different view about the expert witnesses, Ed, simply because I'm aware that this is not a trial that's going to be decided by a judge, who is a judge is a very rational person. He makes decisions based on logic. He looks at the facts. He's trained that way. That's how he becomes a judge. In the case where your case is going to be decided by a jury, most of these people are not professionals, probably no lawyers on their whole jury, maybe very few of them who even have a college education. So a lot of these technical points that are being floated by and promulgated by the prosecution may be just going over the head of a lot of these guys. But what the defense realizes is they only need one juror out of 12 to say that I don't know who did it or whether he did it or not, but I have a reasonable doubt. I am concerned something doesn't add up here right for me. That's what scares me. That's what scares me in terms of getting justice for George Floyd and its survivors, is the fact that you only need one juror to say, I disagree, or I don't agree with convicting this man. And that's when we go back to the voir dire. That's why that is so important. We're talking about the selection of jurors. And the defense went through a lot of pain to make sure that they had a lot of people on the jury with the demographics that may indicate that they have a conservative bent, or that they may not be the type that believe everything they hear or see. And all you need is one of those. That's what scares me about this. I agree. the prosecution has put on some witnesses, and the more technical they were, the more damning they were to the defense, in my opinion. And they put out good stuff. I wish this were a trial heard by a judge in this case, because he would understand the factual implications here and the gravity of the evidence and putting things together from a logical, reasonable standpoint. But unfortunately, this is not a judge trial, and we're going to have to just keep putting forth great evidence and hope that those other 10 or 11 people on the jury are strong enough to convince those one or two that, hey, man, let's get this.
Yeah. So, I 1 minute I feel like, it's moving in a good direction. Then the defense gets up and they go back to that whole notion of, George Floyd had drugs in his system. Yes, he did. George Floyd, may have had an underlying heart condition. He probably did. A lot of us do, especially African-American men at our age, will have exhibited some sort of deterioration in their heart function or whatever. But if you look at the video from the store, he was very much alive 5 minutes before. He was hugging people, dancing, talking to people. Obviously, he knew folks, around. People knew him. Mr. McMillan, the man who stood in there and told Derek Chauvin that he went overboard. The older gentleman, he knew George Floyd from the neighborhood, so on and so forth. Just one last thing on this whole trial. Obviously this is about Derek Chauvin and then the other officers who did what they did. What are the broader implications, though? Because just earlier this week we saw another video, this time of a Army officer who just bought a new car, who gets stopped by the police. First thing they do is draw their guns and talk about lighting them up and manhandling, roughhouse him, even in light of what people already know about what we're saying about police. How do we get at having better people be police? And I don't know if there's a solution for it if racist people still end up being on the police department.
That's it. You're absolutely right, Ed. And you got to start there. You got to start with recruitment, then training, and evaluation, and then the consequences have to be laid for those folks who violate rules. And a sense of accountability has to go forth, and people within the department and the people that they are sworn to protect have to know and believe that there's going to be some accountability. That has to happen. Right now, step one is being avoided. The police unions are strong. You got municipalities that are signing these contracts with police unions, giving them all the authority in the world to determine what police can do and which police you can punish and which you can't, and how much you have to pay them. I mean, this reminds me of the old West, when you got a lawless town, instead of calling in the cavalry, you call in some gunslinger and tell him to clean up the town. And he says, well, what I need to have access to the entire town. There ain't no more rules, there ain't no more laws except me. And he runs the town, and everybody's afraid of him because of his reputation. And he really cleans up the town. But the good town folks can't get their authority back after that's done. He leaves when he wants to. But at any rate, these police unions are too big, too bold, and too powerful. That's the first thing these municipalities have to do, is rein in these police organizations and the unions. And without that, they're just spinning their wheels, having diversity training and inclusion training and doing this, that. They're just spinning their wheels, hiring more people of color to work in the Africa and scheduling people to work in communities that look like them. That's just spinning your wheels. You're not doing anything.
Yeah.
until you make sure you have some control over your police department's union and have some changes in the laws that affects recruitment and training and accountability. That's
Yeah.
the only way we stop this.
Yeah, yeah, certainly. I tell you, Val, you wish you could just snap your finger, but that's not going to happen. I want to switch gears though. Uh, this is related to guns. You were talking about gunslingers. We, you know, uh, just yesterday or day before in South Carolina, Rock Hill, South Carolina, former NFL player burst into his former doctor's place and killed the doctor, his wife, children, and then somebody who worked there, and then turned a gun on himself and killed him. Indications that he may have had some mental health break, and that obviously they're going to examine his brain for CTE, which is a traumatic brain injury that a lot of NFL players suffered, and a lot of NFL players end up committing suicide or either committing acts of violence. Val, you know, President Biden says he wants to do something about gun violence. So they made an announcement at the White House yesterday. Let's look at a little bit of that, and then we'll talk about it on the other side.
Nothing I'm about to recommend in any way impinges on the Second Amendment. They're phony arguments suggesting that these are Second Amendment rights at stake from what we're talking about. But no amendment to the Constitution is absolute.
So, Val, that's Joe Biden at the White House with the Vice President Harris. They had invited people from Sandy Hook and from the Pulse nightclub shooting. This is the weird thing about America. You could talk about Sandy Hook and know exactly that it's about children being murdered. We have, that's how weird this whole thing is. I guess the bigger point though is Joe Biden's talking about the Second Amendment, because every time somebody proposes making it harder for people to get guns, they throw up the Second Amendment. You're the history professor, so I'm gonna ask you to put on your professor hat. Is this bullshit when people talk about the Second Amendment in relation to 2021 and the proliferation of guns, or do they have a point?
They're hiding behind the Second Amendment, Ed. The Second Amendment was written totally for different reasons than they're using it for now. And I'll just take a second to tell you what the Second Amendment really, really said. But you got to take it in context in terms of when it was written and why it was written in place. Second Amendment reads, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. That's all it says. Now, where did this come from? Well, before the birth of the nation in 1776, when all of these now called states were colonies, when the British decided to enforce some of their laws and they thought people may get up in arms about it, first thing they did, they went around and took everybody's gun. And then they said, okay, here's the new law and a new statute or the new rule that we're going to work under from this place forward. So what states and colonies or former colonies wanted, they wanted to make sure that this new government called the United States of America would not do the same thing to them that the British did. So after the Constitution had been written in 1787, they came back and they had what they called the Bill of Rights. That's the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. And that Second Amendment is what we just went over, has to do with guns. And it said that, people have the right to, keep and bear arms. But it starts talking about a well-regulated militia. Militia meaning then, translated to now, we're talking about the National Guard. Everybody was a part of the militia back then when there was time to fight against Indian uprising or slave revolts. That's when all whites came together. You had to put aside everything to do those two things. And people needed to have guns. It was no good to just say you on the side of the militia and you huddle in some corner with your wife and kids and somebody else with a gun has got to protect you. So everybody needs to have a gun. And now what the critical right wing is doing now, and this is my opinion, is that you have a lot of people in that movement who believe that this whole cultural, social, racial issue that we are struggling with in America now may devolve into violence, into some type of armed struggle. And they want to be able to protect themselves and their families should the militia / National Guard, the U.S. Army / Police Department not be able to get to their property to protect them in time. They want to have protection from the marauding hordes coming down from the inner cities of Chicago and DC and Philadelphia and the Bronx and Harlem, descending upon these great, nice little white suburbs in Kansas, right? And in Mississippi. I'm not sure how many gangs on the south side of Chicago wants to come down to the Mississippi Delta to start a fight. To do what?
Right. Well, so I guess I was right then. It's bullshit.
Right.
You know, but the reality is that, so Joe Biden does this executive order. There's always these movements that come up that talk about, again, after Sandy Hook, after Pulse nightclub, after the shooting at whatever high school, pick a high school. Now you have this shooting that happened in South Carolina. We can go back to Charleston. Every time there's this talk about doing something, people like our favorite person now, I think it's Joe Manchin, Val. I think he's going to end up, we're going to have to start putting his picture up with us every week, because it always comes back to Joe Manchin. If anybody's going to stop anything from happening, it's going to be Joe Manchin from West Virginia, isn't it?
Joe Manchin has put himself in a position as the king of the Democratic Party, because no matter what Joe Biden and Kamala Harris decide they want to do, and whether or not Pelosi agrees with them, and even if Chuck Schumer says, I'll go along too, the four of them still have to get together and call and present their brief to the king, which is Joe Manchin. And said, Joe, we got the president, vice president, speaker of the House, and the leader of the Senate here. They want to know if you would grant them an audience to listen to something that they would love to do if it would meet your pleasure. When can we talk to you, King Manchin? I mean, that's the way it's working.
Yeah,
and we're letting him get away with it.
Yeah,
I like to offer a solution with a timeline on it, Ed. This guy's not up for re-election, Joe Manchin, until 24. But there are 21 Republicans that are up for re-election in 2022, next year. By my calculations, based on the results of the 2020 elections in November, 9 of those 21 Republicans are very, very vulnerable and could easily be taken down. If we could take down just a third of them, just 3 people, we make up for Joe Manchin and his craziness. And what we do in the interim between now and 24 is we give him what we call a green treatment, like we do Miss Green in the House. Strip him of all of his committee seats and heads and that kind of thing, and just assume that he's a Republican and let him go against everything that he wants to go against, and we'll just bide our time until we can replace at the ballot box some of these Republicans next year. But we can't keep letting Joe Manchin act like he's the king of the Democratic Party, and the president and the Speaker of the House and the leader of the Senate has to bow down to this guy and ask him if they can pass their policies with his permission. You can't keep doing that.
He has too much power. We talked about it on here about a month ago, about the number of people that live in West Virginia compared to the number of people here just in the Triangle area in North Carolina, and he wields as much power as so many other people. It's crazy. Hey, you know what? That means I hear the music. That means we need to take a break. When we come back, I want to pick up on some more national news. I want to talk about this infrastructure plan. Pete Buttigieg talked about it in the daily brief at the White House yesterday. So I want to talk about that. I also want to talk about COVID numbers. We're not trending well, Val. I've been vaccinated. You've been vaccinated. A lot of people I know have been, but too many people haven't been, and too many people are not, playing by the rules. So we're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to pick up on all of that. You're watching The Deal.
We don't want to miss an opportunity in our community to protect ourselves, especially since our community is disproportionately affected in a negative way right now.
And we've got to encourage those in our community to realize that we've got to look forward, and we've got to find ways to be much more trusting and engaging, and recognize the importance of the vaccine in helping us defeat this incredible virus.
And actually, I've been dreading the little pinch of the needle. I didn't even hurt, I didn't even feel it. This is just a win-win-win. And, I would encourage everyone to take advantage of it. It doesn't take a lot of time or effort, and it doesn't even hurt.
You have a spot, get the shot. So that's what Aggies do.
And welcome back to The Deal. I'm your host, Ed Clark. It is Saturday, April 10th, 2021. We've been talking about a lot of stuff. Started talking about sports. Into this last segment, talking about guns and the Second Amendment and what do we do about it and all sorts of other things. And the President, Joe Biden, is trying to do something, but our favorite new senator, Joe Manchin, seems to be the stumbling block on everything. Val has a plan to neutralize Joe Manchin, which means that all those states that have Senate seats coming up in 2022 in the midterms, people got to get out to vote, Val. And we know we've been talking about all across the country these draconian laws that are trying to keep people from voting, according to Texas and Georgia and all these other places. They're trying to protect the vote. We know that's cynical and it's a lie. We hadn't talked about it before we started today, but Coca-Cola and big companies have spoken out and said, these laws don't make no sense. They're not needed. We don't support them. But people like Mitch McConnell have said it's none of your business to talk about issues. Wait a minute. When they go get this money from these corporate people like the Koch brothers or whatever, aren't they talking about issues when they give them their money? Isn't what did Mitt Romney say? Corporations are people too, my friend. I mean, so what's wrong with corporations speaking up about these bad laws?
Well, I tell you, Mitch McConnell has been on the receiving end of corporations not only speaking up about politics, but actually writing laws from the first entry into a law to the last signature on the bottom line paper. They write these bills and they give them to congressmen that they finance to introduce on the floor of the House or the Senate. So Mitch McConnell is not being genuine at all when he talks about getting out of politics. These are the guys who run politics in America, are rich people. They write the laws that their people that they bought, introduced in Congress, then they rebuy the senators and representatives again through campaign contributions. And they made that a big deal with Citizens United, when now they can give unlimited amount of money and you can't trace the money where it came from to buy people that's going to do their bidding. And they threaten people who are in office to say, you will do this or you won't do that, or you will find $20 million in the coffers of your opposition at the next primary. Yeah. Come on. I mean, that is, if we could turn the clock back 100 years, we'd call it extortion.
Yeah, well, it is. They're buying influence. Speaking of buying influence, this is something that just occurred to me when you were talking about the amount of money that's floating around. I saw the new Forbes list. There's 500 new billionaires in the last year. 500. That's astounding. In the midst of a pandemic, in the midst of real wages for people have not changed in the last 40 years, in the midst of not being able to get $15 minimum wage, in the midst of the union failing to organize down at Amazon in Alabama yesterday, in the midst, I can keep going down the list, right? In the midst of all the people that lost jobs during the pandemic, in the midst of people struggling to pay for housing because housing prices continue to escalate, but their salaries haven't. How cynical are these people for us to think that they don't want corporations to speak up when it's a progressive liberal stance about allowing everybody to vote, but it's okay for corporations to build pipelines? It's just so cynical to me, and we know that it's about money. Don't get me worked up. We managed to mention Mitch McConnell and income disparity just that quick, and I need to calm down because I really wanted to talk about infrastructure. Val. Pete Buttigieg, the new transportation secretary, former mayor of South Bend, Indiana, talked to in the press briefing yesterday. Let's look at Pete Buttigieg.
Thanks, everyone. It's a real honor to be here, especially at such an important and exciting moment for the country. I'm convinced that this is the best chance in our lifetimes to make a generational investment in infrastructure, and that's what the American Jobs Plan does. The need is clear. It's growing by the day. After decades of underinvestment, we have fallen to 13th place globally in infrastructure. Delays caused by traffic congestion alone cost over $160 billion per year.
So, Val, Pete Buttigieg is saying that infrastructure is a job creation program. The proposal that they have on the table is the largest since after the war, right? Or, along with the war, and what got us out of the Great Depression. It was a tremendous amount of spending for public work, right? I can go to any town in America, usually the post office or the federal building or the water supply system or whatever was paid for, and the interstate highways for that matter was paid for with federal money pumped in to support infrastructure, because that created jobs, which moved people into the middle class, which also allowed goods and services to move better along the interstate, took people out of poverty, gave people running water in their house. I can tell you, I'm from Harnett County, Val. When I went to college, a significant number of people still didn't have running water in the 80s. And so government does provide services and that allow people to move up. Talk to me about whether or not this infrastructure plan, though, has a life, because the same dude we just talked about, Joe Manchin, you may be able to scuttle the whole thing because he doesn't like some aspects of it. What's going to happen with the infrastructure plan?
Right now, I hope I'm wrong in my assessment or my guess, but I don't think it'll has any chance at all of passing as it is now. One of the things that you can judge this by, and the infrastructure bill meets the reconciliation requirements more so than anything else, because it has spending, it has revenue, and it definitely affects the debt. But when Joe Manchin will say something like that any voter suppression bill that passes the US Senate must have in it something that makes Trump supporters happy, I thought I was reading a spoof when I first read that. I said, you got to be kidding me. This is a Democratic senator saying we must put something in a voter suppression, in a voter rights bill that makes Trump supporters happy. The only thing that makes those guys happy is when people that don't vote for them can't vote. and you want to make them happy. I mean, I can put that together, but you're right. This guy has no limits to what he'll do or say to stop whatever. And West Virginia is definitely not in the top tier or wealthy states in this country. He's surrounded by people who are poor. They've always been poor and always will be poor. But he and Donald Trump have figured out there's one thing you can do to get a poor man to allow you to continue to pick his pocket. Tell him that your opposition is about to change his culture or do something to harm his race. If you can convince him of that, he'll not only let you pick his pocket, he'll go rob money from his family and give it to you. And they figured that out. And that's what they use right now. And that's why I'm glad Democrats are really finally figuring out, Ed, that we can't appeal to the self-interest issues to get the voters of Kentucky to do anything about Mitch McConnell or the voters of West Virginia to do anything about Joe Manchin. You can't do that. These people are letting their mamas and grandmamas go without medication and food to support their feeling that they're going to be replaced.
Yeah, well, you know, Val, I've been all over the state of Kentucky. I've been to every county in the state of Kentucky. I've been to every county in West Virginia. I've been to every county in Kentucky. In Tennessee. I've been to every county in North Carolina. I've been to every county in Virginia. And my point is that I go to these areas, and I've met people over my entire working life who are poorer than you ever could imagine poor people being. But whenever we see poor people depicted in American culture, it's always Black folks in the inner city. And they're always pictured as being Black folks who are waiting in line for a check. I can tell you that I've been in counties in West Virginia that back in the day when Food Stamp Day would come, or in Kentucky or Western North Carolina, there's not a single Black person in any of those places. There were white families who totally depended on government largesse to live. They lived in public housing. They got Section 8. They got food stamps. They went to the county health department for free health care, and they were on Medicaid. An astronomical number of those people are on disability because they have debilitating health conditions like diabetes and heart disease and Black lung and you name it. All the stuff that gets associated with African Americans. But you're fond of saying this, Val. You can show people statistics all the time. We don't care. What we care about is the image that we see, and that we've equated poverty and taking from the government with being Black and living in Philadelphia. But when in fact, it's a white person living in Pike County, Kentucky, who's actually draining most of the resource in for, you know, the most part, willing though, like you said, still vote for Mitch McConnell.
Well, one of the things, Ed, that you just hit on that I want people to take notice of is that if you go through and run the numbers to see which states are giving the most money in taxes and how they rank with what they receive back in government programs, you can rank all 50 states and they are ranked as either givers or takers. And it's ironic that the givers are the Democratic states. States like California is a good example. They never get back all the money they give the federal government in taxes and things of that nature. But it's states like West Virginia, Kentucky, Tennessee that receive far, far more in government handouts than they pay in government taxes or any of that sort of thing. They are takers. They are dependent upon the excess earnings of people in blue states so that they can live. But they vote for the red guy who's telling them that the blue guys are your enemy. And it's the reason you don't have anything. And they want to take the last thing you do have left, which is your heritage, your culture.
Well, that is exactly spot on, Val. And like I said, until I won't see this day, but in 2050, when it's completely reversed, I'm wondering what it would be like. I would like to see it because I know it's coming. There's going to come a day when they're going to have to reckon with this. I hope that it's not something where the country just falls completely apart, where they get so desperate that they turn to violence. But we saw that on 1/6. That's what 1/6 was about. They turned to violence to try to maintain the status quo. And it's troubling, and it's something we should keep our eyes out for. We got a few minutes left, Val. One other story I wanted to deal with this week is state of Texas. Uh, Now, I'm starting to acquire a really big list of people who may be the most odious person in the world. And we can just, shuffle them around in 1 week window. So Matt Gaetz, Joe Manchin, and Greg Abbott, Ted Cruz, we just, move them around, right? They're proxies for Donald Trump. We used to be able to say Donald Trump is the worst man in the world. And that was true. And we could see him every day because he was at the White House, saying stupid stuff. Well, he's out of the picture. So Greg Abbott is trying to be the worst man in the world. Let's look at Greg Abbott real quick, and then we'll talk about it.
Every day, Texans return to normalcy as more people get the COVID vaccine. In fact, this week, Texas will surpass 13 million doses administered. Those shots help slow the spread of COVID, reduce hospitalizations, and reduce fatalities. But, as I have said all along, these vaccines are always voluntary and never forced. Government should not require any Texan to show proof of vaccination and reveal private health information just to go about their daily lives. That is why I issued an executive order that prohibits government-mandated vaccine passports in Texas. We will continue to vaccinate more Texans and protect public health, and we will do so without treading on Texans' personal freedoms.
So you should not talk about people in wheelchairs. My mama used to say, you pick up people, that got conditions, you may end up like that one day. So I'm not going to talk about him being, in a wheelchair. I'm going to talk about that he's just a horrible human being. Greg Abbott says he signed this executive order in Texas not to allow anybody to require a vaccination passport because it infringes on people's rights. He just said he supported a law, though, to require more documentations to vote. How do you square this nonsense that these people talk about? You have to show that you're vaccinated to get into school. If you want your child to go to school, you got to show that. If you want to travel to certain countries, you got to show that you've been vaccinated. But in Texas, it's too hard to show that you've been vaccinated to protect in a pandemic. What is Greg Abbott and those governors talk about, like Ron DeSantis? What are they really trying to say?
The motivation, Ed, is pleasing the Trump supporters. If once we understand and accept that as being factual, all of this other stuff, it kind of falls in line behind that. It's like tumblers falling in place. That's what it is. They are convinced, they have convinced themselves that without the support of the rabid Trump supporters, their political career is over, because they will not get out of any primary. They will never get a chance to run against any Democrat. So their political career is over. So first order of business about anything, I don't care what subject it is, you determine the subject. I can tell you what position they're going to take. They're going to take the position that they think the most rabid Trump supporter would take or be pleased with that you're taking. So the stuff that the Texas governor says doesn't surprise me. As a matter of fact, it would have surprised me if he would have said anything different. He has to do that because he's convinced himself that without the support of the former Trump supporters, his political career is over. If we accept that that's factual, then it still doesn't make sense to us that we base our thinking on logic and reason. But we understand why they say what they say. Sure. And it's going to continue that way simply because they are afraid of the Trump supporters.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Look, man, time flies when you're having fun. But I do have some programming notes. Next Saturday, Ron McDivitt is going to be here. Ron is an economist over at Duke, Val. I had to go get another Dookie. Ron McDivitt is an economist over at Duke. He specializes in talking about the cost of healthcare to the economy. But we want to talk to him about something really specific with him about how much dialysis affects the budget, the overall U.S. budget. You won't believe the numbers when you hear it, but he's an economist. He's done the numbers. It will astonish you how much dialysis costs to Medicare and to the overall U.S. budget. So Ron McDivitt's going to be in with us next Saturday. We keep getting crossed up with the folks at UNC though, because I want the folks from UNC Public Health to be on here to talk about healthcare disparity. So the next few weeks, I want to do a guest that we want to talk about healthcare. Especially COVID has revealed this healthcare disparity even more. Not that we didn't know it existed, but COVID just brings it more into the clear. So look for that the next several weeks. We'll be having healthcare folks on here. We'll be doing a series on healthcare. So Val, that means I'm gonna turn to you. You tell me what I have to look forward to in the next week, or something's coming up that we need to know about.
Well, the last time we spoke here last week, Ed, I told you that we'd be making an announcement coming up soon about connections. And I am prepared to make that announcement today. We have just received word that we are going to be increasing our staff on connections. We'll have a contributor that will be in from time to time. And he's been a guest on connections over the years. One of my colleagues, former colleagues at North Carolina Central University, he's at the North Carolina Central University School of Law, and I speak of none other than Professor Irv Jonah, who's going to be joining us as a legal contributor for all matters involving legalities that come on connections here with Ed and I. And we'll start that on next Sunday. You'll hear that on Sunday, the 18th of April.
And it's not because Val has legal issues. It's so that we can talk to a legal expert, so we can talk about the Derek Chauvin case and all those other things with somebody who knows more than us. But Irv's been on this program too. He was one of our first guests back when we started doing the deal. So that's a big deal, folks, because Irv Joyner, if anybody doesn't know, NCCU School of Law, when you graduate from there, the bar passing rate is above the national average. You got people in Congress who graduated from that law school. You've had people who've been governors of this state who graduated from that law school. You got people in very high positions all over the United States who graduated from NCCU Law School. And they probably, if they weren't in Irv's class, there's people coming up that have been in his classes that are very influential. So that's a big deal, Val, that Irv has agreed to join us on Connection. So Connections on Foxy 107, 104, Sunday mornings at 8 a.m. Make sure you check that out. As for me, I declined to post my 2 pieces that I wrote the last 2 weeks. I know I said I was going to post them, but I pulled both of them back, Val, because I was snarky in both of them. And I said, well, I don't have to write positive pieces all the time, but I don't also have to write negative pieces all the time. So both of the pieces that I had written were about the Derek Chauvin case. And I decided to hold off on those. So this week, though, I am writing the pieces about UNC and basketball and the significance of Hubert Davis being the basketball coach. So look for that this week, because I think that's an important story, because I wanted to write a positive story, because I had a string of these negative stories that were out there. And I didn't want that to be the tone and tenor of the deal, the written side of the deal, right? So look for that piece on Hubert Davis, because I think that's important. But you know what? I hear the music, so that means we got to leave. So Val, come back next Saturday, promise. And then Ron McDivitt from Duke is going to be here with us. And in the meantime, go do something good for somebody today, as I always tell you that. And we'll see you next Saturday. You've been watching the video.